Hey, it's day 184. We're reading the whole Bible this year, and today we read 2 Kings 5 through 8. So let's get to it. 2 Kings 5, we have Naaman, who is a general from a Gentile place. So they are idol worshipers. They don't worship Yahweh or anything, but he hears that Elisha can do great things, so he goes to visit him, right? And he has leprosy, and he is healed. But first, we have a couple of kind of cool moments that I think are pretty instructive for us. And this whole passage we're going to read is largely full of kind of some random accounts that don't really like further the plot so much until toward the end, but overall just kind of display how powerful Elisha is as he's walking in that doubled up mantle given to him by, or passed on to him by Elijah. Elisha tells Naaman, this general, go wash yourself in the river. And he's like, what? The water where I come from isn't good enough? And his attendants are like, it wasn't about that. If he told you to go do something crazy, wouldn't you do that thing? If it was some complicated ritual, wouldn't you go do that? And sometimes it seems like we want to go over the top with things, right? Like, I know I've heard like with prayers for healing and whatnot, like Jesus just goes like, hey, demon, come out. And the demon comes out. Like, it wasn't anything crazy complicated. It was a lifestyle of following God. Jesus says at one point, this kind of demon can only come out by prayer and fasting. But he didn't have time to fast. He just like walked over and was like, come out. And they're like, what? We couldn't do that. But Jesus keeps walking away to pray and fast, and the disciples had not been, and they were unable to cast it out. And so all that to say, I think here, Naaman would have done some complicated ritual that sounded real fancy and holy, but just going and rinsing himself in the river didn't seem like much. But when he does, he's convinced by his guys, when he does do it, he's completely healed. And then he offers gifts and everything, and Elisha's like, no, we won't take anything. But then his servant is greedy, and he's like, but maybe I will. And so he runs after the guy, and he's like, hey, we changed our minds. There's these two guys who came into town. They would take it, so, give us some stuff. It's just for them. It's not even for us. And Naaman's like, yeah, absolutely. Here, take more than you asked for. And he gives it all to him. And the guy's like, sick. And he goes and hides it, sends the guys away after taking all the gear. And Elisha comes back. And he's like, where have you been? And he's like, nowhere, sitting right here. And Elisha's like, didn't I see you when he turned? Like, didn't I see all of this? Like in the spirit, like the Lord is just revealing this to him. He's like, I know that you are not being truthful right now. So now the thing that Naaman was cured of, leprosy, you're going to have it, and your descendants are going to have it forever. And he leaves with his skin like white as snow. He lies and essentially embezzles, lies and cheats and steals this money away for himself. And then gets cursed for it. A couple of other random things like the axe head and the flour, which is similar to like the flour with the prophets, with the poisonous gourds in the soup and everything. Like just these weird little miracles where it's just like Elisha, just like whatever scenario he's in, the Lord is doing something miraculous and crazy on a level that like we don't really see even in the New Testament, much less, on today. But then Elisha goes and he warns the king of Israel against these Syrian traps, and he angers the Syrians against Israel. And so they come for Elisha. The Syrian raiders come for Elisha, and they're like, we're going to take it out on him. And his servant is freaking out, and Elisha goes, oh, man, Lord, please open his eyes. And he looks up, and beyond the Syrians, he sees the hills covered in a whole, armored horse army. The army of the Lord is surrounding these guys, and he's like, whoa. So then he leads them, and instead of having them killed, he leads them into the city. He prays that they would be blinded. They are. He leads them into the city of Samaria, and once they're in there and closed in, they close the gate and lock them in. Then he opens their eyes, and all of a sudden they're like, wait, how did we get here? Now we're captured by the enemy. And they're like, sweet, should we kill them? And he says, no, because they don't kill them, instead of like, drawing out more anger and violence, they feed them really well, and then they release them, and they go away, and they, for a moment, leave everybody alone. This idea of like that big army and everything else, and these other things that are going to happen with the Syrians fleeing after they try to besiege Syria, calls to mind stuff like, when we sang like, and if our God is for us, then who could stand against us, which is scripture. And, the God of angel armies is on my side. Like, look at what's happening here. There are these spiritual victories that God is winning, not through bloodshed and violence and sending a physical army to come and destroy, but just to overpower and overwhelm. Like, if it comes to it, the Lord has an overwhelming force, but he doesn't even have to use it. Syria gets, again, angered and decides to place a siege against Samaria. And it gets so bad that everybody's starving. And the things it describes are horrible. And one lady calls out to the king and she's like, hey, help me. This lady's not honoring our bargain. And he's like, what am I supposed to do about it? And she goes, well, I mean, we said we'd boil my kid today and her kid tomorrow. And so we boiled mine yesterday and ate him. And now she hid her baby away. And it's like, and the king like tears his clothes and he's walking around in sackcloth and torn clothes. Because, I mean, it's horrendous, the things that people are resorting to. Ironically, they're not trusting in the Lord. They won't do it. It's crazy. Instead of trusting God to do this, they are just overwhelmed. They call on Elisha to ask, like, what do we do? And Elisha says, by this time tomorrow, it's going to be super cheap. And right now, as they stand in the siege, the little bit of food that is available is severely overpriced. It says a donkey's head, which is not the part you want to eat, is 80 shekels, which is a significant amount of money, especially once you compare and contrast. A quarter liter, it says like a quarter of a kab, which is about a liter. And so like 1/4 of a liter, like a very small amount of dove dung is going for 5 shekels. And he says, by this time tomorrow, you're going to see a full seah of flour, which is over 7 liters. So 30 times as much flour versus the dove dung is going to be 1 shekel instead of 5. So, I mean, the scale is going to flip to where it is absolutely insane how expensive everything is during the siege and famine, and then how cheap everything is going to be tomorrow. And then the captain of the guard that's with the king is like, how could that even happen? Even if God literally opened up windows from heaven to pour it out, how could that be? And Elisha's like, all right, bet. You're not even going to get to eat it. You're going to witness it, and you're not going to get to eat it. Sure enough, 4 lepers leave the starving city, and they're like, how much worse could it be, in the Syrian camp? I mean, worst thing they do, they kill us, and we're over this. So they go see what they can get at the mercy of the Syrians. The Lord sends the sound of chariots and horses racing at them. And so the Syrians all flee. The guys get there, they raid the place, and they go, hey, well, we should tell everybody else. So they go back and tell everybody, which like nobody would have done that for them, but they do the right thing. And so then they come and they're like, oh, they must be laying in wait. And so they go and investigate before they just go and get all the plunder. And they find that, no, sure enough, there's like a trail of stuff and they've really taken off. Because if God is for us, who could be against us, right? So then they bring it back. And like Elisha said, everything is super cheap now. And the king sets the captain of the guard at the gate to oversee everybody coming in and out to, bring this stuff in and bring the economy back to like this flip-flop where everything's going to be super cheap. And in the process, he's trampled by the rush to get to the stuff. And so he sees the price and everybody having this available for next to nothing. And yet he doesn't get to eat any of it because he's trampled to death in the process. The final thing that we read about today is in 2 Kings 8. Gehazi is talking with the same leprous servant of Elijah. He's talking with the king, and the king is asking, hey, tell me about Elisha and all the great stuff he's done. And as he's telling him, like, he's even risen the people from the dead. And then he turns and he's like, oh, hey, this lady, it was her son. And here she is right now. And she's coming to appeal to the king because she's fled from famine. And as she's coming back, her land has been taken over, and she comes to try and get it back. And the king goes, wait, your son was brought back from the dead by Elisha? Give her whatever she wants. And he completely restores her. And then Ben-Hadad, the Syrian king, is sick. And so he sends his servant, Hazael, to come and explore and inquire of Elisha what's going to happen. And Elisha tells the guy, no, go tell him he's going to be okay, but he's not going to be okay. He's going to die. And then they're staring at each other, and they have this weird staring contest. And Hazael gets kind of weirdly like embarrassed. Like he just, this piercing gaze from Elisha causes him to feel embarrassed. And then Elisha starts weeping and he's like, why are you crying? Like, what is wrong with you? And he's like, because I see what you're going to do, because you're going to be king of Syria and you're going to attack Israel, and I'm weeping for my people. And Hazael's like, sweet. So he goes, tells the king, you're going to get better. And then he's like, great. And as he's resting, he soaks a rag and he strangles him and suffocates him and takes over as king, and is then going to end up harassing Israel a lot. And that kind of concludes this portion of our random assortment of miracles from Elisha. The last two things are catching up a little bit with the evil kings of Judah who are in, remember, there was this weird like blending that happened where Ahab became the father-in-law, and kind of the his descendants are now on both thrones. So the evil descendants of Ahab on the throne of Judah, who are still related to King David, they're still in that line of David, but they're also now in the line of Ahab. They are horrible, and they continually keep walking in the ways of their father Ahab and not in the righteous ways that they are called to. And this is going to lead to a whole bunch more bad things as we move on into the next things. The one thing I want to point out is the two kings that we have listed here, Jehoram and Ahaziah. Jehoram only reigns for 7 years. Ahaziah only reigns for 1 year. This is what you get for being an evil king that will not submit to the ways that God had intended his kingdom to be run when there's a king there. That really the true king is Yahweh, not these guys. And they won't submit to him, and it keeps going very poorly for them. In all things, turn to the Lord and trust in him. He's got this. He's got more than enough. His army is big enough. His resources are big enough. He can literally multiply absolutely nothing into plenty. If we just trust in the Lord, he's capable of more than we could ask or imagine. So today, I implore you, trust in the Lord. That's what's speaking to me today. I hope that speaks to you. I would love to hear what other thoughts, questions, comments, concerns you have as you're reading this. Drop that in the Bible app or on this video. Thanks for watching with us. Be rad for Jesus.